So you're from Cape Verde, and you have extensive experience in trade and investment issues in the country, both from within the government and outside. We also know that in January 2021, almost 2 years ago, trading under the AfCFTA, or the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, was set to commence. Negotiations are still ongoing, but then an interim trading arrangement was launched last year, October, called the Guided Trade Initiative, where around 8 countries are already trading under the, not under the AfCFTA as a legal instrument, but then under its ecosystem. What can you tell us about the state of things in an island country like Cape Verde, as well as the country's level of interest and readiness to trade under the AfCFTA? Over to you, Amilcar.
I would say that for to start, that Cape Verde is a ECOWAS member country, and if Cape Verde fully ratify the agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I think the political leaders, they understand the vision, but they are, I don't know if they understand the challenge. As an island country, we should have like more connections with the region in order to increase the trade with the region and Africa as a whole. But so far, our trade balance with Africa, it has no volume, and it's highly, I don't know if it's deficitary. We don't export much to the continent. It's less than 1% of our overall trade. I would say that we need to start with the regional integration, because the AfCFTA brings the vision, but we need to consolidate the regional integration in order to take advantage of the instruments that, the AfCFTA, they bring the vision, but they also bring the instruments. But without regional integration, it will be very difficult to take advantage of the setup of the agreement it's bringing. So I don't have much to add on this, besides that I agree that this agreement it's creating a new horizon for African countries, and enabling instruments to make African neighborhood countries, they can start trading with each other. So when you see our past history, you see that Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau was part of the same structure. Well, it was used by the colonial power, but there was native people who were trading between these two territories. Guinea-Bissau it's a delta, so it's mostly rivers and small islands. Well, they have like more than 200 islands in the delta. So Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau were very well connected in the past, because since Cape Verde is a limited territory, we don't have much land to produce and to be autosufficient. So I see there's a lot of opportunities, but without transport, without maritime transport, air transport, but also free movement of capital between the region, it will be very hard to transform the current status of things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. But would you say in general that the current government of Cape Verde, the public service, and to some extent the people, are interested in integrating more within Africa? And I guess this links to my second question, because it's about regional integration and regional value chains from the perspective of a country like Cape Verde. You mentioned that the Cape Verde's trade with Africa is low, and I saw that from OEC World in 2021, Spain received over 60% of Cape Verde's exports. So that's very Europe-facing, for exports, and even for imports, about 40% of imports was from Portugal, and I think maybe another just below 10% from Spain. So at least half of Cape Verde's imports more than half, but then at least half coming from even just Portugal and Spain. Uh,
Mhm.
Cape Verde, as an island state surrounded by water, exports a lot of processed fish. I'm from Nigeria. I know that we have definitely a huge market for products like that in Nigeria, because we do import a lot of fish in
Mhm.
Nigeria. So there's some demand for some of the products that you do have in Cape Verde within the continent. And what do you think is a pathway for Cape Verde to trade more with other African countries? And even beyond that, do you think there's a real interest in becoming a bit less Eurocentric and maybe a bit more Afrocentric? I mean, we need to all be engaged in global trade one way or the other, and even to increase our status in global trade. But we're also saying that we need to trade amongst ourselves as one way to drive industrialization. So what do you have to say to this?
Well, I would say that Cape Verde is not a model. We have 500,000 people living in 9 scattered islands. So it's a very tiny market, very small. And the numbers I would add to the numbers that you say that more than 80% of our trade is with Europe, and it's historically deficitary. Like our imports, it's tenfold higher, historically, tenfold higher than our exports. So you see, this number reflects a setup. We have a legislation to attract foreign investment. So the Spanish invest here in industrial unities to process fish. So under several complex agreements with the European Union, Cape Verde is allowed to export to European Union under revocation of certain laws that enables fish that was catch in the region can be transformed in Cape Verde and export to Europe. So it's on our size, it's a massive investment that exported directly to Europe. So these unities, they are set to operate in between Cape Verde and Europe, and not between Cape Verde and Africa. So we will need to have other agreements to establish other types of operation in order to export to other regions beyond Europe. So the country is becoming Eurocentric, yes, and we follow. I think it's the same path that the French speaking countries in the region. So we have parity with euro. Our currency, it's pegged with euro. So it's the same currency always. €1 it's equivalent to 110 escudos. So for one side, that is good because since the country it doesn't it's not auto-sufficient, you can import from Europe at the same rate. So it's more predictable. You don't have the fluctuation of the currency. But of course, that ties the economy to the European economy. So it's not advantageous for us to import from other regions. So this is a critical issue that I've been talking about this in my country, saying that the parity implies in some costs, and there's a cost to make the parity. And as long as euro is stronger than dollar, it makes some sense. It has some advantages. But if the relation change, the country will be impoverished, because you will need more money to buy the same amount of fuel, which is the main item in our import list. You see, so the country, in my point of view, it's not being managed as it was aspired in the years of the independence. In the years of independence, Cape Verde was an African country. We had a flag with the three colors that most African countries have. And Cape Verde was a prosperous country, in terms of vision, in terms of integration with Africa. But then in the 90s, we had elections for democracy. They opened the market. They completely disrupt the things that was built previously. So now we are in a crossroad. Most people here in Cape Verde, they feel they are Africans, but we don't have much connections with Africa. A few people that are the elite, they dominate the policies, and they try to do more business with Europe, and they tie our economy to Europe. So it's very difficult for Cape Verde to break from these ties, but it's like a new kind of colonization where the country doesn't serve the purpose of Africa. I mean, Cape Verde has to have a purpose or a role in the region. And what's our role? What we represent for the region? What we can bring to the table? We are not bringing anything to the table so far. Most of the time, our chairs in the regional meetings are empty, not because we are complaining about we don't agree with anything. It's just because the priorities are not set to make our presence relevant and feasible. So in the end, if they have missions, the officials, when they have missions to Africa or to Europe, where they go? They choose to go to Europe. So that's why the empty chairs are there. And I know people know this. And of course, when sometimes Cape Verde wants to take advantage to, when we have elections in the ECOWAS region for president, our president decided that he wants to be the president of ECOWAS. Of course, the proposal was not well received because you need to build up in order to occupy certain positions. So I think trade is so critical that I would say that we need a change of policies internally to make things happen, because otherwise what I see now is just intentions. We sign the agreements, we ratify the agreements, but then we don't implement the instruments. For instance, Cape Verde in the ECOWAS, we are members of ECOWAS since 1977, and most of the instruments are ratified. But for instance, the common external tariff, it's been implemented by the African countries. Cape Verde doesn't apply the instrument, and I understand that it's not an easy process because the state depends on the most of the budget depends on the revenue from trade. So the duties are the main source of revenue. The duties and VIT are the main sources of revenue from the government. So to change that and to apply a new common external tariff, it's critical. And besides that, it affects our relation with Portugal and Spain. And so there's a lot of other interests involved that doesn't allow us to just change the policy. But of course, with a revolutionary government like we have in Uganda, things could change.
Well, that's very interesting. So what I'm hearing from you is that, is that there's a need for, I mean, aside the policies, there's also a need for a bit of a reorientation. You know, I mean, it's a challenge that a lot of African countries are facing, where they tend to look more closely at Western partners that they have some sort of history with, whether it's colonial history, or I mean, most of the time because of colonial history. And sometimes they even have closer trading relationships with these partners, like you have, for example, in the CEFA region, where a lot of those countries trade very closely with France and the rest. So that's very interesting. So aside the policies, it's also about, reorientation of the governments and the people to look more at Africa. But then this last point you made, that customs duties are a huge source of revenue for the government. So it means that the potential losses in tariffs for Cape Verde under, a free trade agreement on the continental level, but also you mentioned the ECOWAS common external tariff might be higher than for some other countries where customs duties do not play as a significant of a role in the overall government revenue. So that's something very important that has to be considered, to just make sure that we're not creating, how they say free trade creates winners and losers. I think the AfCFTA is trying to make sure that this is not the case under the agreement. Now, still on the topic of Cape Verde, when it comes to trading goods, Cape Verde, like you said, it's a very small country, it's an island state, so not a very high volume of goods being exported. But then when you look at trading services, the situation is a lot better because Cape Verde is a beautiful country, like you said, a bunch of different islands linked together. And it does export travel services in the sense that you have lots of tourists coming to Cape Verde to visit. And what we know from the COVID-19 pandemic was that a lot of African countries and even countries outside Africa that were tourism dependent, suffered because the pandemic led to the closing of borders and just a serious decline in international travel. How do you think Cape Verde, how do you think Cape Verde is recovering from the pandemic? Do you think there's been a lot more conversation and even action towards diversifying away from tourism trade or tourism exports, even within the general services trade, but also going to trade in goods? And then do you think Cape Verde is looking to have an even higher focus on trading services under the AfCFTA? Because the AfCFTA is about trading goods and trading services. So do you think there'll be a tendency for the implementation of the AfCFTA in Cape Verde to focus more on trading services as one area that it has some competitive advantage on?
Yes, basically, I see trade as a catalyst, as we talked previously. So I understand that trade, it's like a sword with two how you say, two slice.
A double-edged sword.
Exactly, a double-edged sword. So if you don't know how to handle it, you will hurt yourself. And with in Cape Verde, of course, our economy is mostly service, but that's not. I don't believe that's a determinant. I mean, you don't prepare the country to produce goods. You don't invest in lowering our dependence from outside world. Of course, service occupy the main service more important for us than trading goods. That's a reality, but it's not only about tourism. Cape Verde is located in the corridor of maritime transport between North and South, and Africa to Europe, or Africa to America. And you have a crossroads of submarine cables with internet signal. So telegraph was passing here before. We have now the new the cable links that connects the different continents. So you have a lot of opportunities. There are more than 3,000 ships that cross our waters or pass nearby every day. And you have all the air traffic between North and South crossing our airspace. So in terms of telecommunication, finance, trade, there's a lot of potential, but you cannot grasp on this without clear strategies. Of course, COVID, when I saw the impact, the industry just stopped. The tourism industry just went to zero tourists, and I understood that, wow, something is going to happen. The government will understand that tourism fluctuation, it needs to be managed, and you need to lower the dependence on tourism. Otherwise, the country will face other crises. But so far, I didn't see any changes. Tourism is back. The hotels are full again. But this is a global value chain. Essentially, you have the one of the major tour operators with operations in Cape Verde, like it's TUI Group. So they establish a large-scale operations in the islands, and has a huge impact because of the traffic of tourism, but also because there's consumption in the hotels, so they need to be supplied. And of course, these entities, they are not concerned with our local. They are there to make profit, and to make profit, they don't accept shortage of anything. So they have a global value chain operating in Cape Verde as an enclave. You understand what I mean? An enclave, it's like an operation that happens in your territory, but has no connection with the rest, or minimal connection with the rest of the country. So the local providers cannot supply the hotel, so they don't take any benefit from the operations there. So when you see, and if you go, if you analyze things in more detail, you will see that the tourism we have in Cape Verde is a cheap kind of tourism. It's a cheap package, like 1,000 euros. So you can spend 5 days in a luxury hotel in Sal, with everything included, like lodging, food, entertainment, everything is included. So what they are attracting, it's salary people from Europe that wants to have a vacation, so they take advantage of this package. But once they are here, they don't need to leave the hotels. They don't need to eat from outside the hotels. So the level of consumption, it's minimal. They don't consume much outside the hotels. So I would say we have some data, but I'm not sure if it's updated. But they don't spend more than 20 euros per day because everything is included. And of course, if you are coming to spend a few days in Cape Verde and you are staying in a hotel, you will take the transport, use the restaurants, you'll spend more than 200 euros per day at minimum. So I don't see a great advantage of the situation we have now in Cape Verde. And I was really hoping that the government would change some of the policies in order to drive our operations to the continent. But nothing happened. I worked with the government in a plan, the operation program for tourism, but they didn't accept my ideas. And basically, they reinforce the things as they are right now, because tourism is back, yes, but only for the larger players who receive the all-inclusive tourism. So in the rest of the country, the hotels are, the occupancy rate is less than 30% right now. And while the large hotels, they have more than 80% of occupancy. So I'm not sure if I was clear to respond, but this is a critical issue. Like, the pandemic exposed our weakness. It shows how fragile the country is. and how dependent we are from Europe. And beyond that, it shows that if something happened for a longer time, for a longer term, Europe will not be our main partner, because we saw what happened with the vaccines, with how the European countries deal with the situation, where they close to themselves and they forgot the outside world. Of course, the diplomacy in Cape Verde, it's easy to solve things here than in Nigeria. Nigeria is a big country, so it's hard for you to solve issues of million people. But in Cape Verde, with 500,000 people, it was relatively easy to have some vaccine in advance of the rest of the continent. But here is the issue. Our fragilities demands another approach in terms of trade policies. And of course, services is our, we have more opportunities on service, but I understand that the global value chains or the regional value chains, we don't need to be, we don't need to create an industrial zones, but we can develop small industries. Yes, we can minimize our dependence from outside. We can increase our agriculture production. We can maximize what we produce right now. And of course, we can have a different kind of tourism, because if the larger inclusive operators are operating Cape Verde because they see the potential. So Cape Verde can have a diversified policy to attract other kind of tourists that are more sustainable. For now, I don't think we are in the sustainable path.
Yeah, thank you. And you raised a very important point that even with tourism, it's creating some inequalities within Cape Verde. So even with the different islands and with the different service providers, there's not sufficient integration within the tourism value chain within the country. So where you have a few operators getting most of the gains from tourism versus the majority of operators, and it's interesting points that I wasn't even aware of. Yeah, and I mean, some of these things are, can be observed in other parts of Africa. And I just want us to zoom out into West Africa a bit. You mentioned ECOWAS, and I'm aware that you just completed a field trip in Ghana where you collected some data on cross-border trade and investments. From your observations and using Ghana as a case study, what are some of the bottlenecks you think we need to fix in West Africa in order to increase our trade and economic integration via tools like the AfCFTA and the ETLS is one of the ECOWAS's instruments?
Yes, listen, I'm very surprised with the case I found in Ghana. I was ready for the worst case scenario, because the terms of reference that we were working on had a case that trade has a lot of barriers and has a lot of complication. But in Ghana, beyond the investment they made in the port of Tema and the operations they have there, the PPP with Meridian, I have a sense that Ghana has an excellent case study. I mean, I went to the border of Togo, a Aflau border, and I also had opportunity to visit the Akanu border in Togo, which is a joint border post. It's an initiative of ECOWAS to establish several joint border posts in the region. So there are 7 so far. Of course, things take time to happen, and that's why people mostly don't believe that things that had reached the point they are now. Joint border post in Akanu, they have one of the best case study I've seen regarding trade across border. They are implementing the trade facilitation measures, and I can see they are quite advanced. They have a single windows. I'm most curious or most surprised with the e-tracking system they have there, because one of the issues in the continent is that the corridors, it's an opportunity to all sorts of bad things to happen in the corridors, because usually there's no control. There's a lot of smuggling. There's a lot of bad things happening that authorities need to enforce the rules. Otherwise, there's no secure trade, because trade facilitation is there for the legit trade. And of course, that creates a lot of requirements. And these requirements establish a threshold. If you are in the informal sector, it will be difficult to take advantage of these instruments, because trade is a formal activity. So the informal sector are constrained a lot by the rules that have in place. But the formal sector can take advantage of what they have in place. So the single windows enable a risk management system that do the pre-trial of the manifest. When you declare that you are importing goods, the system do the trial and separates the ones that goes to the green line, that the ones that goes to the red line. The ones that goes to the green line, they have 3 permits to go. They may have some additional procedures to scan the containers, but they are not subject to physical inspection. And the ones on the red line, they go directly to the physical inspection. And the physical inspection is manual. Besides scanning, they do the manual verification of the cargo. And that takes time. And sometimes you can complain about the time it takes to do the physical inspection. But you see, drugs can pass by, arms and other undesirable goods can transit if you don't have this physical inspection. So, and that's why sometimes operators complain. But I also noticed that operators complain because they are not aware that the level of sophistication they have in place allows them to verify the documentation and see if it's legit, if it's not fake. Sometimes under the scheme of trade liberalization, people try to fake the certificate of origin in order to have clearance. Of course, with the system they have in place, they will detect it and this cargo will not proceed. And so there are these issues, but with the transit in this border, the example that I saw there, they have like a e-tracking system where the cargo is coming, for instance, from Nigeria and is going to Abidjan, and it comes to in a cano where it's a transit, so it's scanned and it's sealed. And with e-tracking system, they can monitor the transit of that cargo from one border to the other border. And when you reach the other border, the seal must be unviolated, and if it's all good, the cargo can go. I think this is a best case in Africa, because I've been taking part of the meetings of ECOWAS long ago, and in a meeting of 5 days, we used to spend 3 days just discussing the issues of corridors. Of course, for me, it was not entertaining subject, because people talk the same things all over. But with the case I saw in Ghana, I understand that things are not stopped. The reforms are in place, and they take time to materialize. Like the Akano border, the joint border posts took more than 10 years to be operationalized. But it was operationalized in 2021. The systems they have in place are not connected, but they exchange documentations and they can easily verify and confirm things. So things are working there. I didn't see cargo. They don't have warehouses with amount of cargo waiting to be processed or long lines of trucks waiting to be cleared. So things are moving fast there. They receive more than 50 to 70 trucks of large containers, and they are processed all in the same day. So better than that, I think, just in Europe or America.
Okay. So that means we have a lot to learn when it comes to trade facilitation from Ghana. So things are advancing when it comes to digital trade facilitation, like you said, the electronic monitoring of cargoes. And you mentioned that there's still some maybe dissatisfaction with the fiscal inspection of goods, but that sometimes that is required as long as it's done in a speedy manner. That's, I mean, it's good to know. It's always good to hear good news when it comes to trade, when it comes to trade relations. I mean, in Ghana, in West Africa, in Africa. So I look forward to, I mean, to the study that you're working on, so when it comes out, just so that we can even learn more from each other as is needed. And then one of my last questions. Yeah.
Before you go to the last question, I didn't quite complete my response, because when you talk about bottlenecks, and we need to see things as a value chain between the registration and the trade operations in the borders. What are the bottlenecks? In Ghana, they are not for sure in the borders. They're not in the borders. They may be in the corridors. But in the corridors, since 2021, the government of Ghana removed the toll booths. You know, there were toll booths along the road, and the cars need to pay different kind of, if you are a truck or a motorcycle or a familiar car, you need to pay some small fees to go along the road. And you may find a lot of these toll booths. So in Ghana, the government decided since 2021 to remove this. They are not there anymore. So the transit in the corridor was fluid, no cargo jams, no blockage. It was happening. So, but when we start going back in this value chain to the register office, we found a critical situation where, of course, you can easily register a business proprietorship in Ghana, and but that's only for Ghanaians. If you are a foreigner, even if you are from ECOWAS member country, you need the minimal amount of capital for you to establish an operation, $500,000. It's crazy. And if you want to partner with a local Ghanaian, it lowers to $200,000 from your side. If the Ghanaian side, if he wants to have 50-50 business, he will need to bring $200,000 as well. So I think this is one of the greatest concerns, one of the greatest barriers we have in the region, is that we don't have a special regulation to enable business in the region. Of course, we can move around. And when I arrived in Ghana, I just present my passport, and in the beginning, the official didn't know where Cape Verde was, but he called his boss, and his boss, he's from Cape Verde, he's a citizen from a member country, so he's allowed to enter without a visa. Of course, that happens when I went to Nigeria, and even in Senegal, it happens sometimes. And I know you have a problem with
even in Senegal.
well. discuss.
In Senegal, they didn't know where Cape Verde was.
No, sorry. In Senegal, they know where Cape Verde was, but sometimes the officials try to require some visa.
Okay, they didn't know it was in
that happened
ECOWAS.
long ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
They don't know that you are allowed to enter without a visa. Sometimes it's an official that is new there. He didn't receive a proper training. He is not, or he didn't work with in this border with Cape Verde, so maybe he was not aware. But in Ghana, it happens now, and I was surprised because I was hoping that Cape Verde was mostly known in the region, but it's not. So these are the issues that we have in place. And of course, one of the key issues, not related with Cape Verde, but with the neighboring countries between Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, it's these countries, they have mostly similar economies. So they compete with each other. They don't trade much because their base of operations are quite similar. So it's difficult for them to integrate. But if you allow people from Nigeria or from Benin to establish operations, to create business in other countries, it will facilitate things and it create more trust, because now I think even ECOWAS has been done a great job with the ETLS, which is now decentralized. That's one of the findings. Before, when I was in Director General for Industry and Trade, we need to submit the application to the registration of products under the scheme. We need to submit to Abuja. And it took a lot of time. It was all paper-based, and sometimes the member countries didn't know that a product was already registered because the information didn't. So, for instance, a company in Cape Verde tried to export a bottle of waters to Guinea-Bissau, and the product was registered, the rules of origins were met, and everything was in place. And when they arrived with the product in Guinea-Bissau, the customs there didn't recognize the product as a ECOWAS product. So they lose money because of that, and they don't do a second trial because they don't trust that the scheme will be recognized. So, but now it's decentralized, and in Ghana, all the registrations are made in Accra, and the information is in the single windows. So when you arrive with your cargo, it's recognized immediately. The bureaucracy, it's much lower now. And the second thing is about the informal traders. People are much concerned about allowing people to do trade across borders, especially the small, the informal operators. But this is critical because we can see this as a problem or as an effect. I understand this is an effect because, well, we did a trial, a simulation, how much a small cargo of rice and palm oil, how much they will pay in the customs. So these two items was evaluated according to the rules they have there, and they reach a valuation of $200. And then they applied the duties, and the final amount to pay, it was around $150. You see, it's more than 30% of the value of the good, and the valuation is using the same reference they use for container goods. So these people, they are informal traders. They go to the Benin and they buy rice, like 100 kilos of rice, and they bring to the border and they pay more 30% over the valuation that is established in the system. And this valuation is set for larger cargo, not for smaller cargo. So, which implies that the small traders are paying a lot more, and they're paying a different value from the value from the rice they bought in Benin. You see what I'm trying to explain? I'm not sure if I was clear now.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it perfectly, and I'm glad that you raised these questions because I know we had previously discussed the issue of investment. I mean, there's an investment protocol now that, I mean, under the AfCFTA as well, that we're hoping will help to harmonize some of this. Well, I mean, even if not harmonize, but then synchronize and clarify some of these investment policies to make it easier for Africans to set up operations in different countries, because that barrier that you mentioned in terms of the minimum capital is very high. It's probably too high, you know. And then the other issues you also mentioned, I mean, you mentioned how it was very difficult before to get the needed documents or to operate under the ETLS, but that now it's decentralized, so it has improved to an extent. But I think you've highlighted some of the critical things that we still need to be looking at. And one thing that we keep on saying is that the AfCFTA, you know, is building on the REC, so the regional economic communities like ECOWAS. And people always ask me this question. I think even last week someone asked me the question that, shouldn't we focus more on making the REC successful before focusing on the AfCFTA? And I said that, you know, both things can be happening at the same time. The AfCFTA needs to learn from the experience of the RECs, you know, the challenges that they face, how they try to address the challenges, and then build on that experience for the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. At the same time, the improvements that needs to happen at the level of the RECs needs to continue. So luckily, we do have separate structures. It's not like it's the people that are managing ECOWAS that are leaving ECOWAS to go and manage the AfCFTA. So we do have a team working on the AfCFTA. We have a team working on ECOWAS, but then there needs to be a lot more learning, you know, across the different RECs, across the continental agreements, just so that we're minimizing the mistakes that we make and we are, you know, making progress at a faster rate. Now, I mean, a question that's more like the final question, and you mentioned some of this already because you spoke about entering West African countries with your passport as a Cape Verdean. ECOWAS usually you can, if you are from an ECOWAS member state, you can enter ECOWAS countries for a period of up to 90 days, visa free. I studied in Ghana, so I was also able to benefit from the free movement, one way or the other. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the AfCFTA, as an agreement that is trying to ease the trade of goods and services across the continent, also has a sister, you know, agreement or protocol, which is the protocol for the free movement of persons, or the FMP protocol. And this protocol is trying to say that Africans should be able to move within Africa easier. They should be able to visit, to be able to study, to be able to work, and even be able to establish themselves businesses, I mean, different African countries with less difficulties than currently exist. But the FMP has seen very little political will. So on one hand, you have the AfCFTA that has been ratified by, I think, 46 or 47 member states, and then signed by about 54 member states out of 55. But then the FMP, you have only 4 ratifications. I think you have 30 signatures, but only 4 ratifications. I think Rwanda is one of the countries that have ratified the agreement. So you have very low interest by many African heads of states to move the FMP forward. So there's low appetite maybe for free movement of persons. There's more appetite for movement of goods, but then there's less appetite for the movement of persons. But goods hardly move without people. So, you know, this challenges with movements can eventually create a bottleneck even for the implementation of the AfCFTA. What do you think can be done to make African leaders and African citizens, because it's not just the heads of state, it's also the people, more amenable to free movements within the continent? A lot of us, our borders are even more open to Westerners, you know, so Europeans or Americans, than it is to our fellow Africans. What do you think can be done to make our leaders, but also ourselves, more open to free movements?
Yes, I think this is a critical question. I think we need to change the narrative. We have in place in Africa. I was telling you this, that the bad news are broadcast and the good news are ignored, or people keep talking about bad news as if it's a general thing. Africa is the second largest continent in the world, and you have 54 countries, and so it's a large continent. We cannot allow people to keep reproducing old narratives, not based on facts, but based on, oh, Dangote says that it's happening in Benin, so it's a general issue in the overall Africa. I think one of the issues that I'll be recommending under the project that I'm doing is to do the tests for clearance, the time for clearing goods in every border, because in that sense you have clear data of what's happening in each border. So far, we don't have a clear understanding of what's happening. And sometimes in certain regions, there are instabilities. So to allow people to move in a global narrative that things are messy, it doesn't create trust for government to make it happen. So even here in Cape Verde, there's some issues with the protocol. The protocol is there, and it should allow free movement of people. But once people get here, they will the migration, they will require the proof of living. If people are bringing money, if they have, if they can prove they have, they can sustain themselves in Cabo Verde. But I know that it's not only that, it's more a question of mentality. It depends on the people you find in the border. And of course, it's different to allow, because Cape Verde, as islands, we have a stock of everything, a stock of people, a stock of food, a stock of fuel. So a lot of people in the islands can disrupt the sustainability of things. So things need to be controlled as well. But of course, when the overall narrative is that in the region, there are a lot of poor, and these poor people will not be able, they will augment the number of poor that we have in the islands. It makes the authorities a little bit skeptic to implement the agreement as is. But I understand that the process could be different and be more natural and more welcome as a whole, because ECOWAS of people. So that's the clear indication that the ECOWAS protocol was established on this, on the free movement of people. And that's one of the most advanced RECs in terms of free movement of people in Africa. There's no one has the level of agreement we reach in the region. But in the overall, I think we need to tackle the narratives, and we need better stories. I think you are doing a great job with bringing these stories, explaining people the intricacies of trades. So we need more tennis style publishing more stories about Africa, and the good ones. I mean, we need to tackle the bad ones, but we need to reproduce the good stories. Like I mentioned the Akano border. It took 10 years to come to lands, from the beginning to now, but it's there. So no one covered the story yet. No one talked about what's going on in these joint border posts. So this is a great case study that can be replicated all over Africa. I mean, there's a lot of good stories. The port of Tema the investment they made there, it's huge, fantastic. They create a barrier that is something amazing. It's like a pyramid that comes from the bottom of the sea, 100 meters below sea to the top of the sea. It's amazing. The port of Lomé is also one of the major ports in the region, and it's allowing trade to the interior of the continent. So I think these stories we need to grasp on it and explain people a new narrative. And of course, when you have leaders like Paul Kagame interfering in things that people think they are assets, like United States, they export a lot of used clothes to Africa, and that's disrupting our industry of tissue. Because you can buy used clothes
Fabric,
for
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Kagame decided this is not an ideal situation. So he disrupted the imports of used clothes to enable a rising industry of tissue in Rwanda. So that's
Of
amazing.
textiles.
So
Tissue is a French tissue is a
yeah,
French word. Yeah, textiles. Yeah.
exactly. So you see, these are the Kagame did that. A lot of people complain about Kagame, and they use the narrative that the United States was telling Kagame is a dictator and he's doing bad stuff, and people didn't understand that Kagame is doing what needs to be done to protect his people, to protect his industries. And these are the changes we need to implement and create a new narrative. Of course, if you don't have if you have conflicts in certain region, then people tend to understand that it's all over Africa. It's an arrest, a civil revolution in somewhere, terrorism. They tend to augment it and make it bigger than it is in reality. And of course, that constrains the confidence that we have in the future of Africa.
Thank you so much, Amilcar. And you're right. I mean, the narratives, because yes, we do have problems, but they are often over-exaggerated. The issue of insecurity is very real, but often over-exaggerated. And then this image of poor Africans, struggling at the borders, it's a very Western image. And we as African countries should not adopt the same narratives in here. We had the issue with the Tunisian government recently, where there was also this narrative against anti-Black African migration into Tunisia. So yeah, I think and that's why I mentioned not just the governments, but also the people, because it's not just the governments that are resisting. Africans themselves are not yet fully open to free movement. You have cases of xenophobia in South Africa, for example. So we need to figure ways out of telling new stories, perhaps even through our movies, because we do have some cultural integration where a country like Nigeria exports a lot of cultural products through music and movies. And perhaps you can use some of these tools to, tell an African story that is ours and not just a replication of the headlines you see in Europe or in the US. The closing, now the closing comments or the closing statement, something that you already mentioned, which is the issue of trade as trade as a catalyst for African development in general. We're having a conversation just before we started the interview, and you mentioned how there's a lot of focus on trade policies at the moment, but that it's just one out of a bunch of other things that need to be done towards African development. So maybe in a few minutes, maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, you can summarize, some of your thoughts on this particular issue, on trade as a catalyst for African development, but some of the other things that we ought to be paying equal attention to really get to where we're trying to go.
Yes, I understand that we need to invest in schools of trade. We don't know much about trade. I myself, I didn't went to a school of trade. I was lucky to work in the Chamber of Commerce and had opportunity to be part of several ECOWAS meetings and capacity building initiatives near WTO and ACP, so African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. So I had opportunity to grow up my knowledge on trade. But I understand that if you want to have a different story regarding trade, we need to train specialists, because trade is so broad that they introduced me in Ghana as a trade specialist, but I don't see myself as a trade specialist. I'm more a trade generalist, because I read a lot about trade. I know a lot about trade facilitation agreement. I did a TFA gap analysis here in Cape Verde, which allowed me to hone my skills around TFA. So it's an easy document to read, but when you compare it to your local legislation, the custom codes, the trade policies, and other issues involving trade, it's scattered around every other policies, infrastructure, other trade agreements, other bilateral agreements. So trade demands this. In my country, trade is under the Ministry of Energy. So I imagine that the minister don't have time for trade. So trade is delegated for several other stuff in the ministry to handle, but trade should be handled as a priority policy. It should guide every other major agreement. It should be involved with diplomacy, with attracting investment. So, and trade is so critical, then sometimes they establish, like in the past, in the 90s, they established a policy here in Cape Verde to favor carpenters. I don't know if it's the word is correct. Carpenters. They work with
Carpenters,
woods. They make,
yes, carpenters. Yeah.
yeah. They try to favor the class, so they rise the taxes for to import furniture, and now it's very expensive. No one revised the laws of until now. So now you have unconformities. You have this strange effect, anomalous effects of trade, and people don't understand why is this happening. It's because trade must be tuned. You need to tune every other instrument, and periodically. You should not create a legislation and keep it there for 20 years. Then things change around, and your legislation determines how trade is implemented. And of course, that creates a lot of constraints that create barriers and doesn't allow new ideas and new opportunities to be bring to the table, because things are established by the law. So trade must be implemented in the best way approach that we see in China and we see in WTO. We have these commissions that establish to tackle specific issues that follow what's happening in the global world and change things inside to create other opportunities. Trade is strategy. Trade is basically what you want to develop. This is your reality. This is the scenario. How are you going to change this? What you know, that's the fundamentals. You need to have people with internally. You have people with clear knowledge about different aspects of trade, from goods to intellectual property, capital, communication, rules of origin. You know, this is all special areas that if you don't have specialists to work on these subjects, you'll be losing track. And to finalize, one of the things that I noticed is that in my region here in Cape Verde, we are surrounded by the poorest country in the world. And we are all countries that has insignificant participation in the global trade. And we are the poorest one. So is this a coincidence? I don't think this is a coincidence. This is lack of knowledge on trade. And you go to the other side, China. It's not only the most robust country in terms of trade, but it has in place a structure to make trade work as a catalyst. We saw what happened with China. China, in 20 years ago, was a developing country, and now it's one of the most advanced countries in the world. And what happened there? What happened there? I think it's about the knowledge they develop around trade, which enable them to create the free zones, to create this project to the corridor between Beijing and Lisbon, where they create investment, they create opportunities. I don't know how to explain it in better terms, but that's my idea, that we need to foster our knowledge and our laws to be more adapted to the current reality and take advantage of what we have. In Nigeria, for instance, you have a strong industry of movies. But you know, if you want to go to global stage and disrupt things, you need to be better on intellectual property. And you know, while Africa is using the garbage that is bringing from China, we could be transforming our traditional products that are not in the custom codes. The rules of origin doesn't apply to several products that are produced in Africa. And once you want to export them, they are not recognized. For instance, in Cape Verde, we have grog. It's a liquor produced in Cape Verde before rum started to be produced in South America. But we don't have intellectual property around it, so we are unable to expand the industry. So I hope my conversation was sufficiently clear to
Thank you so
respond
much.
to your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Amilcar. Thank you for taking the time out for this interview.